Well, good evening, Forest Mill. It is good to see you tonight. Well, not really see you, but you know what I mean. Really glad you're here. We're going to be looking forward, of course, to coming up shortly, just in a couple of weeks, our proposed reopening on Sunday mornings. And I know you're looking forward to that, and just at least as much as I am. And we've been in prayer about that, and our elders have been seeking counsel and trying to do the right thing. And it's a difficult position. So I'm very thankful for their leadership, for their willingness to be hopeful and cautious, and to look out for everybody's best interest. In the meantime, this is what we got. And so this is what you get. We're going to be continuing our study through the Psalms tonight. And if you noticed, I've kind of been moving more and more towards a devotional type thought. And as we go through the Psalms, you kind of can't help but do that. That's the way they're geared, to really look at the inner life of us and examine that in the light of God's word. And so that's where we're going to be continuing tonight. And I wanted to start with a question. Have you ever found yourself at a moral crossroads, facing a difficult decision, facing a situation that's got consequences either way? Maybe the checkout clerk at the supermarket gives you too much change back, or maybe your boss takes a break and you're tired, and so you're pondering taking an unscheduled break yourself. Well, here's an example. We're going to use his name, Paul, and Paul uses every legal means to avoid paying more than his share of taxes, but he still pays quite a bit every year. And he's reminded others in his local Christian businessmen's group that he leads that everybody should pay every cent they're supposed to. But because of recent economic downturn, he's got quarterly payroll taxes due, and he's got his annual income taxes coming due. And so he faces the reality that paying those is going to nearly empty his bank account. Now, Paul knows 40 different gray area tricks that several other businessmen use all the time to sort of keep money in their accounts. And he's thinking, maybe he should go ahead and give his accountants the green light to use that sort of accounting technique. But first, he sits down with a couple of his close friends who meet him for coffee. He asks for wisdom. He reminds them, I know what I've told everybody else in the group, pay the dollar, save your honor. But that's been pretty easy for me to say. If I write these checks according to the rules that I've been using, my cash flow is going to be wiped out. I'm thinking about letting my accountant keep my books like a lot of other people's. If I do some gray accounting, I'm halfway to meeting next month's payroll expenses. So you tell me, have I been too idealistic about how I've kept my books? Imagine you were sitting across the table from Paul. What would you tell him? Now, virtually every one of us has found ourselves at similar crossroads at one time or another. Not that we would do anything, outright evil or criminal, but looking real close at that gray area in between. Does everything really count? Does it really even matter if no one else finds out? So tonight we're going to be looking at Psalm 15 and prayerful hope that it will provide us some insight into our daily lives, to helping us make decisions when the times are tough and we're sitting at one of those crossroads. So let's start by reading Psalm 15. It's not terribly long. Lord, who may dwell in your sanctuary? Who may live on your holy hill? He whose walk is blameless and who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from his heart and has no slander on his tongue, who does his neighbor no wrong and casts no slur on his fellow man, who despises a vile man, but who honors those who fear the Lord, who keeps his oath even when it hurts, who lends his money without usury and does not accept a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things will never be shaken. So this psalm begins in verse 1, in essence, asking who's qualified to live with God? Who can really be called the family or close friend of God? Who can receive God's favor? Now, that word for dwell can also be translated, it's a more literal translation, would be sojourn, to live in a place as a sojourner or a stranger. And remember, it wasn't very long ago from this psalm that the people of Israel lived in tents exclusively, that they had no permanent structures to live in, and including the tabernacle, which had the Ark of the Covenant. And this was to be where God dwelled, right there in their midst. At the same time, this psalm asks, who can live on your holy hill? And that does infer permanence. So while the dwelling place of God moves, our place with him does not. In other words, we move with God wherever he may be. Where he goes, we go. Like Ruth told her mother-in-law, where you go, I will go. Where you dwell, I will dwell. We will stay where God stays. And this psalm is asking, who is qualified to do that? Why would God even allow such a thing? Who would he allow to do such a thing? And then in verse 2, it talks about this sort of person. It says his walk is blameless, or some translations would say who walks uprightly. Either translation is fine, but it makes us think, they can make us think that this sort of person has to be perfect. That's not exactly what's meant here. If we had to live a perfect life, then no one would ever come close to living with God. It means something a little bit different. Now remember that walk was another word for live. Your walk is your life, the way you live, and to walk blamelessly meant to live your life in a way that is complete or whole, without parts that are missing or defective. You take my car, for instance. If you go out and you went into the parking lot, or went outside my house and saw my car, you'd see right now it's got dirt all over it. And if you looked inside, you'd find some random junk on the floorboards and sometimes in the seats, and sometimes it doesn't run the way it's supposed to. Just got it out of the shop not too long ago. So it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, at least not in the sense that we would say, oh, this car's perfect. But it runs. It has an engine, has 4 wheels, has a place for you to sit in it. In fact, all the parts are essentially there and working. It is perfect and blameless in that sense. It's a working, running car. And the rest of these verses in this psalm go on to describe what that sort of life, what a working, running life in God looks like. It talks about what a man says in verses 2 through 3, how he treats others, what a man values in verse 4, and what a man's word was worth, how a person even uses their money. Now, that is like the essentials, the basics of what a life is. What we say, what we do, how we treat others, whether we're honest, how we use our money. This is what a whole life is sort of comprised of, right? You take those things together, and they paint a picture of a person's life that is whole or blameless in the sense he's talking about, a life that honors God. And we're not going to go through all of these characteristics in depth, but we're going to try to sum them up in modern language. And I know that it's going to sound overly simple, but this is sort of the gist of it. Be honest. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Love God and hate what is wrong, just like God does, right? Say what you mean and mean what you say. That's 4. I'm not very good at 4. 4. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Don't love your money more than you love other people. Those 5 things. In short, we have to be people of integrity. And I know that's a difficult word to understand, especially when we see it thrown around in political ads, as we do when election years roll around. Every politician is a person of integrity. But essentially, it's saying we need to be able to do the right thing, even when it hurts, and stick to our guns in that matter. Following God was never meant for the weak or the faint of heart. Some of you may be old enough to remember Chris Spielman. He played for the Buffalo Bills. He was a middle linebacker, and he was everything that a middle linebacker should be. He was tough, he was strong, he was smart, he played with passion, total commitment, and loyalty to the game. And in fact, he played the entire 1995 season with a torn pectoral muscle that he sustained in the season opener. But playing the game took a distant second place in his thinking during the 1998 season. He chose to stay home. He cooked, took care of his kids, cared for his wife, all by choice. Stephanie, Chris's wife, was struggling with the stark reality of breast cancer. She had surgery, chemotherapy, the nausea that came with it. Those were her opponents. And during her fight, Chris stayed by her side. His actions supported his family before job credo. That's what he'd always said. And now it was being put to the test. And he was asked by a reporter from the Rochester Democrat, a local paper there. And he asked if Chris was considering a return to the Bills later in the season. And Spielman said, "Oh, I'd play in a heartbeat. But what kind of man would I be if I backed out of my word to her? I wouldn't be a man at all." That's the sort of man who takes an oath and means it. Another story to sort of illustrate the point. There was an antique dealer named Roy, and he bought what he thought might be Jefferson's desk that had disappeared back during the Civil War. But he looked it over, decided it was really just a good reproduction. So he included it in his auction. And on auction day, this woman came in. She loved the desk. She promised to pick it up and pay the next day. Before the auction, another bidder, this guy came up to him and asked him if he'd gotten a good price for this desk that had a hold on it. And Roy told him, "Yeah, she's going to come back and pick it up tomorrow. I got back what I put into it." The man said, "I'll give you twice what you paid for it right now." Roy goes on, tells him, "Look, this is not an original. This is just a good copy." This man turns out to be an expert. He tells him, "No, it's just the insides of the drawers that have been replaced. This chestnut is 18th century. This craftsmanship is definitely original." So the woman shows up the next morning, and Roy explained to her what he had learned, that this was, in fact, Thomas Jefferson's desk. "Then you won't sell it?" the woman asked dejectedly. "Oh, yeah, I will," Roy replied. I gave my word." But this woman weighed the responsibility of owning Thomas Jefferson's desk, and she told Roy that she would settle for just a good reproduction. So Roy sold the desk to a museum, and he presented this woman with a beautiful reproduction, plus a check for $100,000. Those are some real life examples of people facing decisions that were probably just as tough as the decisions that you and I make every day. And yet both of those men chose to do the right thing, to keep their word, to do what they said they would do. We don't have to be heroes or superhuman beings to live the kind of life that honors God, that brings us to him allows us to live with him. But we do have some tough decisions ahead of us. Some of you might be facing really tough decisions right now. Decisions that I can't even imagine. And we have to take those decisions at those crossroads, one step at a time, with the knowledge that with each defense of our integrity, it grows stronger. That's the sort of person that lives with God. So my prayer for you, Forest Mill, this week is that we might be people of integrity. Psalm 15 is a great psalm for meditation and encouragement. I would really encourage you to dig into it. You might even can memorize it this week to see what sort of person God is calling us to be. May God bless you in the study of his word this week.